Welcome, welcome. Um, we are going to be talking about peripherals and connectors this morning, technical session number 12. So, peripherals and connectors. Basically, all the things that we add to our computers to kind of make them functional, more useful to us. So this would be things like webcams, different types of keyboards, microphones, all that fun stuff. I know CompTIA is going to be spending a little bit less time on peripherals, but they still do put a focus on connectors. There are some connectors that are falling off, some new ones that are being added. We are going to get into a lot of that stuff, but just having a basic understanding of peripherals is still extremely useful with regards to our helpfulness as tech support professionals. So the majority of this particular lesson focuses around different types of cables, connectors, and things like that, and not so much around the peripherals. The peripherals are pretty quick and easy to go through, and thankfully relatively straightforward. And we're going to be talking about the various interfaces and stuff that we use with regards to that. All right, so BSMs we want to keep in mind with regards to this technical session are customer focus and growth mindset. And customer focus, pretty straightforward. Without customers, we don't have a job. So we do have to keep them in the front of our minds and understand that their needs do take primacy with regards to our actions. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily dealing with outside people, outside the company when we say the term customer. We could be dealing with internal or external customers. So an internal customer would be, people who work at your same company that you work for, but you're handling the tech support portion of that job function. And what you don't want is when they have a problem going, oh gosh, I gotta call IT. You want them to basically call up and say, hey, this is such and such in accounting. I'm having a computer problem. Can you please connect me with Davin? Last time I called in, he took care of my problem. It was awesome. And I personally just like to deal with them. That's where you can kind of set yourself apart when people are calling back. Instead of going, whatever you do, don't connect me with Davin. You'd rather have them the former than the later. So even if you can't solve their problem, you can still give them a pretty good customer experience. And one of the biggest things is they know that your problem is important to them and you're not just kind of discarding what's going on, and your ability to kind of convey that you're going to do everything possible to try to resolve their issue. And then as well, maintain a growth mindset. We're not the same person we were last week. We're learning, we're growing, we're developing, and that's always possible. So, what essentially is a peripheral device? As we just kind of mentioned here a little bit earlier, it's essentially an auxiliary device that adds functionality to your computer. If you have a desktop and a normal monitor, adding functionality would be like adding a webcam, adding additional storage, an optical drive, things like that. Various inputs or outputs or communication devices. So inputs being like keyboards, mice, scanners, stuff like that. Outputs being printers, speakers. We talked a little bit about this earlier in the cohort. So various input components you can use. A lot of these, are pretty familiar. Keyboard, mouse, pretty familiar. Microphone. If you've had to go to a big box store lately, you realize that there are no cashiers anymore, but they do give us kiosks. And so we've become familiar with barcode readers, scanners, things like that. Webcams, as we're all on them right now. And then, game controllers and stuff like that. Some things you may not be familiar with would be like biometric readers, that read your fingerprints. We do have them on our phones, but they do have them as peripherals that you can put on computers, and some of them are built in. And then card readers. Although more recently, we are seeing these chips, those little gold chips added to credit cards or debit cards, stuff like that. For many years, they were used as access cards in places like in the military. They were called cap cards. And then we would have port badges as well to get into the ports, and they would have those chips on them as well because they were a little bit harder to counterfeit, so to speak, than a carbon strip on the back of a card. All right. So other inputs that you can utilize, one that you do want to kind of remember or keep in the front of your mind is the KVM switch. And KVM is short for keyboard, video, mouse. And what this allows you to do is to hook up a single keyboard, monitor, and mouse to multiple machines. And you can switch between them. This is really handy in server rooms, instructional tools, we like to use them, stuff like that. So it's called a KVM switch, keyboard, video, mouse. It's definitely one you want to take note of. They love asking about KVMs. Input, output, touchscreen. Again, remember the rule. If they're speaking of a monitor and they don't specifically state that it's a touchscreen when they're talking about a desktop or a laptop, we don't assume it's a touchscreen. If it's a tablet or a phone, it is assumed to be a touchscreen. And then smart TVs and MIDI-enabled devices if you're into music. So other input outputs. Output components, pretty straightforward: monitor, printer, speakers. I'm sure we have a lot of exposure to these over time. Now, turning around and looking at the back of your computer to get an idea of what we call I/O connections or input-output. Yes, this one is a little bit dated, but it starts to give you an idea as to some of the stuff. So up at the top, real quick, we have what are called our PS2 connectors, which these are old school keyboard and mouse. Some of them were color-coded with the purple and green. Some of them were just straight black. But they would call these PS2s. These still do pop up. So they're still out there. I know it's legacy, but they are still out there. So those. Right below that, a couple things we are very familiar with, hopefully, USBs. And these have the rectangular, what are called USB type A. And then right next to that is our Ethernet port or network connection. And the connector for that, which we will get into when we get into networking, is called an RJ45. All right. As we get below it, serial port, that's definitely a legacy one. It'll be rare that you'll come across something like this. This is for like old school modems, like dial-up, where we would actually pick up the phone, dial the number into the phone, and then put the phone onto a receiver to actually communicate with the internet. So that's when we would use the old serial ports. VGA, also known as a DB15, that's Delta Bravo 15, or what it's short for is D sub miniature. Yes, you still come across these in the wild. CompTIA is phasing them out, but you should be aware of them because this is an old school, what's called analog connection before we switch to digital. They typically have the blue connectors that have the screws on either side that you plug them in and then you screw them in. You may remember those from school. But the most recent office I was in just 2 years ago still use the old school VGA ports for many of their computers. And these were recent monitors too. Below that are speaker connectors. These are the 1 1/8 inch jacks. And I believe they're called TCCP connectors. RCCT. It's like ring, collar, collar, tip. If you look at a headphone jack, you can see the ring at the base, then it'll have the little black lines on it, and there's the tip on it. And if there's 2 rings, like 2 black circles around it, it means it's just headphones. If there's 3, it means it also has a microphone. You know, but we'll talk about those a little bit later. Old school printer port. Also, I think this is called a DB. I think it's like a DB 30 or DB 25. And then you have an old school game joystick. A lot of this stuff has been replaced by just straight USBs. So it's still there. It's a good idea to know what they are in case you come across one. But again, for the most part, this is being replaced by USBs, and especially now with the USB-C technology coming in, a lot of the stuff is being legacied out. Speaking of USBs, there's a lot of varieties and flavors of those. So, USBs tend to use serial transmission, and one of the unique things about them is you can support up to 127 devices chained together and still be able to communicate. Pretty impressive for that kind of technology, especially when you consider the age of the USB. Beautiful thing about them is they are what's considered hot swappable. And I always add a little caveat. I don't know why not 128. Maybe they ran out of devices in the lab. I'm not sure. But I put a caveat on this hot swappable term. Does anybody know what hot swappable means? When you hear that term, what does that mean for you?
You could remove the drive without having to turn off the power.
So you can swap it out without having to turn off the power.
Or also disconnect it from the OS.
Yeah, disconnect. So the reason I put a caveat on that, so now that we know what hot swappable is, what do we assume cold swappable is?
You have to shut off.
That you can't take it out.
You can't take it out. There we go. Thank you, Iman. The system has to be off to remove the device. So that's cold swappable. Now, there's another term, warm swappable. What does that mean? So we know what hot is, we know what cold is. What would warm mean for us?
Devices need to be stopped in the operating system.
Wonderful, Tamika. So we need to stop the device first. We need to take an action before we can remove it. So we have to eject the USB before we can remove it. Do we not see that all the time? Where you have to like right click your USB, eject the device, then you can pull it out. If you pull it out, just snatch it out. It says, you know, drive was ejected improperly, may cause damage, da 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 da. So it says hot swappable, but in reality, it is more likely warm swappable. But for the purposes of the exam, it's considered a hot swappable technology. All right. Old USB typically has 4 wires, 2 for communication, 2 for power. And there's been a few versions that have come out even beyond this. So we have the old school 1.1 USB. They called it full speed. And then they went to 2.0, which was high speed, super speed at 3.1. And then you have, or 3.0, and then you have super speed USB, which gives us 10 gigabits per second. So the main thing that we're asked, we need to know the throughput speeds that'll kind of help you determine which technology you're dealing with. And my main thing is know the low end, know the high end, and then you should be able to figure out kind of in the middle. And then your individual maximum cable length is somewhere around 3 to 5 meters before data starts to break down. And then when the data starts to break down, transmission speeds slow down drastically, so they don't typically make cables beyond this length. So you're not going to find them. All right, so that's the USB basics. On site, just looking, how can I tell the difference between a USB 1 and a USB 3? Does anybody know this?
USB 3s are blue.
USB 3s are blue. What are USB 1 and 2?
Black.
Black. Unless you're on a Mac and they like to make everything just, aesthetically their way. So everything turns out just like either white or the color of the computer you have, which makes it a little harder to determine. But in general, 1 and 2 are black, 3 is blue. They also come in different shapes. So the one we are used to, the rectangular one. So over here is a USB type A. So the long rectangular one, that is a type A connection. The squarish one next to it here, you typically use for like printers, stuff like that. That's the most common place you see it. I have seen it on some like exercise equipment. Like I used to have a rowing machine that used the type B, something along those lines, but it has that squarish connection. Then we get into the ones we remember on phones. So here's the mini B, which the mini B, I wish they had, I think they have a more front on looks at these in a little bit, but the mini B almost looks like a hat. So it kind of goes like this, and it goes over, and then comes up, down like that. So that's the mini B. Looks like a hat. That was on like camcorders, digital cameras, maybe early computers, something along those lines. And then you get the micro B. So the mini looks like a hat. The micro B was much more common on cell phones, especially in the Android era. And it kind of looks like that. Has the little data pins in the middle. And that's the micro B. You need to know these. Yes, you do need to know your different connectors. Now, the micro was used for a long time with Androids, but has been replaced lately by the USB-C, which has rapidly become the industry standard. We'll talk about that one in a bit. All right, so over here we have what's called the micro A. It looks like the micro B here. And these are 2.0s, because you can see they have the white or the black internals. So the micro B is slightly smaller, annotator, slightly smaller than the other micro A. So it still has that same shape as the micro B, but it has 2 little tabs that kind of stick out of the bottom of it. That kind of helps secure it in place. That's the micro A 2.0. We start getting into the 3.0B, which has the teal color or bluish color inside it, but it also has a little extra box on the top. So it looks similar to the original B back here. It's a little squarish look, but it's missing that little box on top. And then obviously the color is different. There we go. And we have a much faster throughput on these. This is a 3.0. And then lastly, for these really quick, before we get into different ones, is the 3.0 micro B. This is typically seen in hard drives, like external drives and stuff like that. And it almost looks like two connectors put together. So it's almost like they took a micro A and a micro B and put it together. So you have like the bottom, oh man, I can't draw. Bottom piece, and then you have, your big connector goes down like this, and then another connector sitting next to it, if you can kind of see that. So it's two connectors essentially put together in one. They have a better picture of it on the next slide or so, but just kind of to show you a little bit. So clear drawings. So can we see that two connectors put together right here a little bit clearer on this one? Some of these connectors can, be or a little bit easier to see on this one. We have our type A rectangular, the one we're most aware of because we use all the time. Type B, that's squarish connector. Micro B 3.0 has the two connectors together. The old micro, which was our old phone connectors. The mini looks like a little hat. For you Apple users, there's the lightning connector, which is the 8-pin. There's an older, like 28-pin. This is the 8-pin lightning for most Apple devices, and then the Type C. Type C is, like I said, becoming the industry standard. And one of the things that kind of makes it unique and on all the other USBs, not so with the Lightning, but the other USBs, is it's a reversible plug. So it can go in either way. Where the USB has this little plastic tab down here that's in there that has the wires on it, it can only go in one way. So that's one of the unique identifiers, other than it is a much faster connection, a more robust connection. And due to a lawsuit in Europe, likely the iPhone will be switching over to the USB-C pretty soon as well. So it basically will become the universal connector.
That's what my iPhone and stuff come with now.
But see?
Yes, especially
Okay.
my iPad and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, this lawsuit was like a couple of years ago. I didn't know if they had switched over yet. So it was like a year or two ago. I didn't know if they'd switched over the connector because, again, they're not going to run two different production lines. If they're forced in a large market, huh?
I think for the iPads they switched it to USB-C, but not the phones.
Yeah, most of the iPads, I feel like the lower-end iPad, the old one, still uses Lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the thing about the Type C, iPhone will create their own. They still don't want there's still a lawsuit about that. Even though they still say they were gonna do a Type C, they will still make it their own way.
Oh, probably, but the whole point was in Europe they were complaining that they had to buy specific connectors just for those devices. So they needed to have connectors that worked with multiple devices.
That's the thing. For the iPhone, you will still need to buy it from Apple. It will not work.
No, the thing they're saying is that they're going to lock the high-speed charge or the high-speed data transfer on their official cables, but you can still plug in like a regular USB-C cable if it does happen. So Apple being Apple, they'll find a way to make some money off of it. But you can still be able to charge.
Not to get off topic, I'm just curious. So, because the same connector that looks like this Type C that I use for my iPad, I also use to charge my PS5 controller. And it's like reversible. You can turn it on both sides. It really doesn't have a standard, but it has its own box that you have to use.
What they're saying is they'll turn off high-speed data transfer.
Yes.
On anything that's not their cable, so that wouldn't affect your charging.
No, I was just saying, in regards to the fact that I thought it was the same connection that when you go to Apple, because I was listening to what they're saying, and I'm sorry, I'll revisit that. It's just some familiar things that kicked in just talking about this stuff.
Understood. So yeah, we're going to see the Lightning kind of go by the wayside in lieu of the C. If Apple wants to play too many games with it, they'll start becoming irrelevant again, like they were in the 90s and early 2000s. So customers only want to deal with so much hassle. They like things that just work. All right, FireWire. It is still kind of around. It does still pop up from time to time. It's predominantly seen in hard drives. For its day, it was one of the fastest connections you could get. It was extremely nice to use, and it allowed you to daisy chain up to 16 drives together if you wished, or devices. And they had the 400 and the 800 versions. And the number you get is the transfer speed, so that makes it nice and easy. The 800 could chain up to 63, 400, 16. Now, not only do you need to know what a FireWire is, but you need to know its government name, which is the IEEE 1394.
You have a social security too?
I don't know. They refused to share that information with me. They said it was proprietary. So FireWire, IEEE 1394. Other places you might have seen this, if there are any old school gamers that like the Nintendo DS and used to do the networking of two DSs together, that was also a FireWire. I believe the PlayStation
2, PlayStation 2 had it. Yeah,
there you go.
to connect two consoles together for, like, I guess, local multiplayer.
Yeah, local multiplayer. There you go. Xbox was both a little bit more and less slick in that sense with the original Xbox. They sold you the Xbox cable, and it was like $40 for this like 3-foot cable. But the IT community quickly found out it was just a crossover cable. And you could make one for under $1. So this is what the FireWire looks like. It has like this little box thing. It's, you know, kind of hard to see, I guess. So it's got the little box piece, and it kind of that right here, and then the other side connection looks almost like an arrow. So it kind of swoops in like this, and then I was terrible at art. That's why I went into IT. All right, so one side looks like an arrow, the other side looks almost like a box, but these would be your IEEE or your IEEE 1394s or your FireWire connections. Questions on this? Have we already learned way more than we ever wanted to about cables? I do feel your pain. Was my least favorite chapter when I was in there. So infrared, we don't have to remember all of this stuff about infrared. This is really a legacy technology, but they do like to throw it in the mix for a few things. Where did we typically see infrared technology? What was the most common place that almost everybody utilized where we saw infrared? TV, remotes. Yeah, Tamagotchi.
Payment system and the
So yeah, so TV remotes for the most part, infrared, line of sight. So you have to have direct view of the item you're wishing to communicate with. So you have to have direct line of sight. You could get up to 5 meters or 15 feet with it. And the problem came is if there was bright sunlight, that's also infrared light. So your remotes wouldn't work in bright sunlight. These also worked for data transfers. You could use them like to transfer data between two computers if you really wanted to. The only problem was it was super slow. Top speed, 4 megabits per second. That's fast for them. Medium, about 1.5. Slow, 115 kilobits per second. That is brutally slow. So as we can see, for the most part, these have really gone by the wayside. Most remotes nowadays are Bluetooth. They just link that way, and it's just easier. It's low power and quick and easy communication. And it can even go through walls to a degree. So you don't necessarily need line of sight. So that's part of why it was legacied out. So Bluetooth, wonderful and amazing technology that is still evolving with regards to what we call PANs, or personal area networks. An easy way to think of a PAN is within arm's reach. So this would be like wireless headphones, smartwatches, things like that that you would use to kind of add functionality to your phone or your computer or whatnot. It could be another computer if you're connecting two together. It operates on the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth, which is the same as Wi-Fi and your microwave and your cordless phone in your house. So yeah, it's a pretty busy channel, but it has the ability to kind of do what's called micro jumps and move between bandwidths and find open bandwidths to communicate. So it's pretty nice. And the evolution of it, I think it allows up to 10 meters or 30 feet from the host device to be able to communicate. And that's with minimal interruption. So each wall you put into place will disrupt the signal. If you live in a place with concrete walls, it's really going to disrupt it. If it has metal studs, also gonna affect it. So, you know, but in an open space, 30 feet, that's a pretty good range for wireless headphones. All right. Again, we went through this from before. The mini DINs or PS2 for your keyboard and mouse. Again, these are a legacy technology that are getting phased out. Serial port also getting phased out. This is a modem connection, and they call this DB9. It's the other name for it, serial port or DB9. And the 9 comes from the number of pins inside it. So if ever you're curious, it's 5 pins on top of 4 pins. So 9 pins. DB25, parallel port, usually used in printers, 25 pins. DB, short for D sub miniature. Another one that has been legacied out, but occasionally you do come across it. RJ45, this one is not going anywhere anytime soon. This is the backbone of most networks. This is an 8-pin connection and kind of an upgrade to the old school telephone line. And so, yes, we do need to know the RJ45. All right. Pause right here.